Hello everyone, in this video we're going to be talking about how the pieces move. So let's go ahead and we're going to start with the pawn. So the pawn is the weakest piece on the board. Usually you have him all the way in the second rank for the white pieces and the 7th rank for the black pieces. The idea is that the pawns can only move forward, they can never go back, you know? And at the initial movement of the pawn can actually go 2 squares, and then from there is only 1 square, right? So usually the pawns move 1 square, but the first one, you can actually go 2 squares. So you have that option, you know. So this is the idea. We can always move forward twice, and then from there is only once. All right. So that's usually how the pawns move, just forward. You don't have to do like the double square move at the beginning. You can also just do like one, you know, and that's fine. So the idea of the pawns is that they can also capture, like every piece on the board can capture other pieces, but the pawns, we can think of the pawns as little ants, right, with little antennas. So they capture diagonally to the front, you know. So let's say that we have a piece here for some reason, like a black piece, and then we can just capture the knight like this, diagonal forward, you know. That's how we can capture a piece with a pawn. Also, another thing about the pawn is, like, if we were to move forward all the way to the other side of the board, we have this option that it's called a promotion. We're promoting the pawn. We're promoting it toward, like, as like for it to be like the strongest piece on the board, the queen. Or we can also under promote it into a knight, a rook, a bishop, and you can think like, why would I just promote it into like a knight instead of a queen? Like the queen is the strongest piece in chess, right? But there are circumstances where under promoting it into like a different piece is actually better, so you can avoid certain things and you can try to have an advantage in the position. All right, let's move forward. We're gonna move into the next piece, which is the knight. So the knight is a tricky piece, to be honest, and we can think of knights usually like they hop, they jump, you know. So also in chess, the knights can go over other pieces and they move. Let's think about this. We're gonna go 2 squares to the front and 1 to the side, either left or right, or we can also go 1 to the front or back, it doesn't matter. So 1 square one way and then 2 to the side, like this. So the knight can move like an L. So that's a usual shape, you know, like an L, like this. So it can be like an L like this, it can be like an L like this, you know. So in this case, this knight covers all these squares and he has all these jumps. And we can think like, hey, like, you know, like the best square for my knight is this square here. How can I make it all the way there, right? So we can think of like, okay, we want to get here. How can I make it all the way there? We can try to think of like ways that the knight can jump to make it to that square. All right. So the knights are a little bit tricky because it takes a little bit of thinking. You know, if I want to make it here, how can I make it? How can I get it there? You know, so we have to be a little bit patient about how we can like bring the knight to a certain square that we want. That could like be a better improved square for the knight, you know, where we can have a better position. We can give a check. We can give an attack or something. All right. So that is the knight. Oh yeah, again, the knight can jump over other pieces. That's the only piece that can actually go or hop over other pieces. All right. Also, one thing that, before I forget, whenever the piece lands in a certain square, if there's a piece there, we're capturing that piece. Okay. So if like there's let's think about this. Let me add a piece here. So in this case, we have a rook in this position, and then the knight, because the knight can hop into the on the rook, and you can see the little circles. That's where the knight can jump. We can actually just capture that piece, and that's where we land, and that's what we capture. We just squish it. All right, perfect. We're gonna move into the next piece, and I'm gonna add another one here because in chess we have the 2 colored bishops. So the bishops are like a pawn with a pointy hat. So the bishops attack diagonally, like an X, you know. So the light square bishop, this one here, attacks all the way there and all the way to the back and all the way like that. So you remember when like you remember how I said that the pawns cannot move back? The rest of the pieces can. The pawn is the only piece that cannot move backwards. So don't forget that the bishops can always, like also the knights, our bishops, everything else. We can go forward, we can go backwards. All right. So we can think of the bishops as snipers, right? Like that's the coolest gun usually, like whenever you're playing a video game or something. It's like long range and nobody can see you. It's pretty similar to chess, because people sometimes forget that the bishops, like if the bishop is here all the way here, like they forget that there's a sniper there, you know? So that's usually what happens in chess as well. But yes, so we have a light square bishop that covers all this, and we have a dark square bishop that in this case is covering all this, you know? Perfect. So those are the bishops. They have long range. So the good thing about the bishops is that they are very, very powerful in open positions, because they can see pretty much like, I mean, half the board, right? But they can see there's a long range of sight there. All right, let's move forward to the rooks. So we saw that the bishops can attack in a diagonal like an X. Now the rooks can attack like they can go in a cross, something like this. So up and down and to the sides, all right, like a cross. Perfect. There we go. And again, the only piece that can hop over other pieces is the knight. Everything else, if there's a piece blocking or something, they cannot go through. They have to take the piece, right? They cannot just go over. So, perfect. And let's see. Let's move to the next. The next one is the queen. The queen is a very powerful piece, and actually the most powerful piece on the board, even though everything's relative. All right? I'm going to explain a little bit more about that in a little bit. But the queen is a fusion. We can think of a fusion between the bishop and the rook. Because we can think of the bishop can attack diagonally, remember? In this case, the queen is in the light squares, so we are covering the light squares here, like a bishop. And also with the rook. We're going to combine the bishop with the rook, so the rook can attack like on a cross. So you can see like how powerful the queen is. So the queen is looking at the light squares like this, but what if the queen is in the dark squares? Now she's covering up this diagonal light, like dark squares, you know, but still the rook action here going on. Perfect, you know, so the queen's very powerful. It doesn't have to go all the way to the furthest point. It can just go like, you know, if there, but that's that's the trail where the queen can go, you know, like all that. Lastly, we're going to be talking about the king. The king, we can think about the same movements as the queen, but because it's a king and it's an old game, we can think that this king is very old and it's with a cane and can barely move, like, you know, a little bit. So the king, it's very old and can barely walk, so the king can do the same tracks as the queen, but only one square, like a bishop and like a rook, but only one square. All right, so that's the movement of the king. And now, to give you a better idea of like the point value of the pieces, like it's relative, but like the pawns, their point value is like, it's 1. We have the knights, they're considered to be a point value of 3, as well as the bishops also 3 points, the rooks 5 points, and the queen 9 points, you know. So that's, and why do I say relative? It's because, for example, think about a rook that is a little bit trapped behind pawns and not really doing anything in like the corner, you know, not seeing anything, the day of light or anything like that, or the light of day, sorry. And then you have a knight that is covering all these amazing squares. You know, we can put the rook all the way here, just covered by the pawns. Imagine something like this, you know, something like this. We can think of this position, like what piece at the moment is this knight like really 3 points? I think like this knight is pretty strong, you know, so I would think like the knight's a little bit stronger than the rook in this position, because the rook is doing nothing, you know, the king is there, it's kind of been blocked by everything, so it's relative. So everything's relative, even the pawns, you know, because if you have like a pawn, if you compare this pawn here, and then we can think of like, let's see. Okay, if you compare this pawn to this pawn, this is a 1-pointer, you know. What about this one? This is about to promote. It's a, you know, it's not a 1-point pawn, you know. So that's why I say it's relative. But yeah, that's how the pieces move. And that's it. Well, I'll see you on the next video.